Well, church, it's good to be with you today. Glad you're joining us, whether you're here in person or tuning in with us online. It's good to be gathered together in this space. If you were with us at Easter, I shared a little bit of a story of my story, how Jesus intersected my life, flipped my life upside down, changed the direction I was going, and had me on a new path as I encountered His grace and mercy, following Him, following the invitation to follow after Him and joining Him. It caused me to find myself on a campus at Briarcrest Bible College about just over a year after I chose to follow Jesus. To talk about culture shock, that would be a big part of it. Culture shock of things like curfews, dress codes, what movies you can watch and what movies you can't watch, language like eschatology and soteriology, things that were just well outside of the norm. Also, singing out of hymn books. I don't know if you've had the experience of singing from a hymn book, but you don't sing the whole first paragraph. You sing the first line, and then you go down to the second paragraph, and you lead the second line. That was a whole new experience for me. The church I grew up in, or the church I became a Christian in, we had, cutting-edge technology, the overhead projector. And so all you had to do was follow how that, the paper, the overhead slide just moved around a bunch. That's what we had to follow. We didn't have to jump lines and those things. But I'll never forget one of my first weeks at school and my roommate teaching me how to find the right hymn and then sing the hymn properly. Culture shock. For sure. One of the things that happened in the first couple months at Briarcrest is that we had a missions conference. All of this was fairly new to me and lots of unknowns, but I'll never forget the speaker we had at the main sessions, a guy by the name of George Werver. He was the led and started an organization called Operation Mobilization, a missions organization. And he was up there talking about a lot of things that I had no clue about, like a 1040 window, talking about limited access nations and creative engagement and smuggling Bibles behind the Iron Curtain. These were all things that were really foreign to me. I had no concept of what it was about. But one of the things that stood out and was clear in light of what he was speaking is that we were called to be people who shared the good news of the gospel with the world around us. That we were people that were called with an intentionality to go and share the message of Christ. It was interesting. It was pretty amazing that here we are in the middle of the prairies in this small little town on the side of the highway, and the nations came as missionaries came back to tell stories, to share the work of Christ around the world. And I sat there in awe of the way God was at work. It blew my mind and my understanding of how God moved in our world for someone who had, not long before just chosen to follow after Jesus. It was interesting to see the message and the passion that George brought as he shared a heart for the world and a reminder that God calls us to join him in that very work, to see a transformation and change, to share hope and good news in the world around us. And that each of us are part of that. As we've been going over the last number of weeks, we've been working through a series in Acts, probably a 30,000-foot view, picking up some key highlights of the book of Acts as we've been working through this. And I think if you were to look at the book of Acts, you could probably summarize what it is about and what are some of the key points in one verse. And it's from Acts chapter 1, verse 8. And it speaks to this idea and this understanding that the good news that God has for us, that it starts with a place of being empowered by the Spirit. That we are empowered by the Spirit. And that because of that, we will be ones who carry the good news with us into the entire world. That we will be his witnesses in Judea. What is it? I got it wrong. In Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. That we would be the ones that carry that message with us. And you see that in the book of Acts, right? In Acts chapter 2, Lisa talked about it last 2 weeks ago, a couple weeks ago about the Holy Spirit, and previously as we started this series about the understanding of being empowered, being led, and who the Holy Spirit is. And you'll see that in Acts chapter 2, we see the outpouring of the Spirit. But then the second half of Acts is really this picture and the story of the way that the church went out with the good news. The church went out partly due to persecution, partly because they were persecuted for the faith, being thrown in jail, being persecuted for believing, declaring, bearing witness to who Christ was. But then they also went out, and you see Paul going out, sharing the good news, building into the churches in the places that he went. And so that is part of the call for us. You read this passage in Acts chapter 1, and oftentimes we can think about mission as that's just for the radical ones. Like that's just for the really called, those ones that are really serious about following after Jesus. And yet this passage in the book of Acts is and was spoken to the entire church. Like the whole church was gathered together, and these words were spoken. You will be empowered by my Spirit. You will be equipped for the work I've called you to, the work I created you for. But I want you to go and bear witness to my work in your life. Now, the church we read about in Acts was hearing the very words from Christ. They had encountered him. They'd been around there. Unfortunately, we don't get that opportunity, but we can bear witness to the work of Christ in our lives. We're called in the same way that the early church was called, that you will be empowered and equipped by the Spirit to bear witness to what God has done in your life. We carry with us the same work of Christ in us, that he equips us and empowers us for a time and a place to be people who bear witness. And we can't put off to the side to say, oh, that's not for me. That's just for the special people. That's just for the unique ones. That's just for the called ones. That's just for the ones that are set apart. But just like the message was spoken to the entire church, the message is spoken for each and every one of us as followers of Christ, that we would know and encounter the work of Christ in our lives, and then that we would bear witness to that to the world around us. Now, one of the things that we talked about a few weeks ago, Carl was up here and shared, Carl Waldron shared some of the transition process for us and some of the ways that God has been speaking to us as a church and forming us and shaping us, and some of the things that he's been bubbling up to the surface saying, here's where I'm calling you to focus your attention. And out of that, we've worked on and refined this purpose statement that we've been working with over the last year. And it read like this. This is what Carl shared a couple weeks ago. It says, we exist to be good news to our neighbors and beyond by practicing the way of Jesus. At St. Albert Alliance Church, that we exist to be good news to our neighbors and beyond by practicing the way of Jesus. We talked about it, the reality that the church hasn't always and isn't always known as good news. And yet what we carry with us, what we bear witness to, is the good news of Jesus. That he is the one who has come as a display of God's love for us, as a demonstration and an invitation to experience grace and mercy, to experience hope and peace and healing. And he is the one who is good news. And we exist as a church community, as a body here at St. Albert Alliance Church. We exist to be good news to our neighbors and beyond by practicing the way of Jesus. It really captures kind of two sets of scripture that we often refer to, that often get referred to. If you've been around church for a while, you would have heard these things like the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. So you got the Great Commandment in Matthew 22, the idea of loving God and loving people. Jesus spoke that to his disciples. He says, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And then the second one is equally as important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commands. Love God. That's the work of, the experience of leaning into practicing the way of Jesus. How do we build and position him and build practice into our lives pursuing Jesus? Out of that comes this experience, comes this practice, comes this reality of having a heart for the world. We see God's heart for the world, right? John 3:16, for God so loved the world. That's everybody. That's his desire for people, that they would encounter and know his love. And so because of that, he was willing to send his son, that people would know and encounter life and life to the full. And so in that statement that says we exist to be good news for our neighbors and beyond as we practice the way of Jesus, they're built out of this idea of understanding the great commandment, loving God first and loving people, but also the great commission that we would find in Matthew 28 to go and make disciples. This is Jesus in his last words as he's finishing up in the Gospels. We read this. He says, he told the disciples, I've been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go. Go and make disciples in the name, or in all the disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teach these new disciples to obey all of the commands I have given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the very end of the age. It's a promise of God that he is one who equips us and empowers us. The message from Acts 1:8 that I'm going to give you the Spirit. You're going to be empowered and equipped and sustained by the Holy Spirit that will give you all that you need. And it's lived out of understanding this promise that I am with you always to the very end of the age. God's desire to walk with us, God's desire for us to follow him, to be used by him, to be those who would bear witness to the good news, to say, this is what Jesus has done in my life, the way he's transformed me, the way he's shaped me, the way he's molded me. And out of that, I get to live this, and I get to share that with those around me. We have often talked, there's times you might have heard it from the stage, as we've spoken, we've talked about it as staff numerous times, a reality and an understanding that many times our knowledge, like the things that we know, often outpaces our practice, what we do. Oftentimes, the things that we know outpaces what we actually do. We can be sitting here, and if you've been around church for a while, I hope you will have heard the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. That those would be things that you've been aware of or heard at different times in different places. And yet, many times, we can kind of put those off to the side and say, well, that's for the really committed. Like, that's for the real disciples. The call to go and share the good news, that's for people really equipped, that really have it all together, that really have it all figured out. And yet the call for each and every one of us, Jesus extends the invitation, just like he did to the disciples, the first disciples that he called. Would you follow after me? Would you follow after me, and you will bear witness to what I've done in your life? The things that the disciples shared, the things the disciples lived out of, was bearing witness to what God had done in their life. In my first couple of years at Bible college, after hearing some of these stories at our missions conference, one of the experiences that I had the opportunity to be a part of is to go overseas and serve playing hockey with our team. We went eat my first 2 years, first year to Sweden, second year to Russia, and we went off with opportunity to play hockey, but out of the opportunity to play hockey was an opportunity to share and speak with the teams that we played with, to go into some of the hockey community and the hockey culture and share the work of Christ in our lives, to bear witness to what God had done in our lives. And they were things that took us well outside of our comfort zones, outside of what was convenient and comfortable and known. And here we are in front of these other hockey teams sharing the message of Christ, sharing a witness to what God had done in our lives. And it was something that formed and shaped part of my perspective of God's heart for the world, seeing him work through just a bunch of ragtag hockey players. Some of the guys had never left their home province. We had, kids from Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Alberta. Some of these guys had never been on a plane, and yet he used us to share the opportunity, or take the opportunity to share the message of Christ around the world. It was a practice that the team then implemented, and we continued to walk out in a hockey culture in southern Saskatchewan, and as we moved on to play in the Alberta College League, that we would meet with the teams that we played against to share and bear witness to the message of Christ. The hockey culture isn't the most receptive at times to things like a message of Jesus and his love for them, and yet we continue to say, God, what are you equipping us for? Where are you placing us, and how do we bear witness in these places to the message of Christ in our lives? How do we live that out because of the work you've done in us and through us? There's a quote from a missionary. He was a missionary in like the early 1800s, and he said, the Spirit of Christ is a spirit of missions. The nearer we get to him, the more intensely missionary we become. The Spirit of Christ is the spirit of missions. The nearer we get to him, the more intensely missionary we become. That happens because the nearer we get to Christ, the more we grow in an understanding of who he is, the more we understand his heart for the world. The more we get close to Christ, the more we come with a posture of surrender. We say, Jesus, you can have anything in me. You can form me and shape me. We begin to grow with his heart. And we begin to see how that heart transfers and is intersecting in our world. And all of a sudden we see with the eyes of Christ. We see our neighbors. We see our coworkers. We see our fellow classmates. We see people in various places around the world, and we have a heart. We have Christ's heart for those people. The Spirit of Christ is the spirit of missions. The more we grow in knowing and experiencing Jesus in our own lives, it's not for our comfort. It's not for us feeling like, this is warm and fuzzy and I like it and I enjoy it and it feels great. But it's for us to grow with a posture of saying, I see Jesus' heart for the world and I want to join him in those places. I want to join him where he's working. I want to use the gifts, the skills, the ability that he's put in me to share and bear witness to his work in my life. There was a quote from Michael Ramsey, who is the 100th Archbishop of Canterbury. He spoke this to a denominational gathering in 1963 here in Canada. He said, the church that lives for itself will die by itself. He's saying, church, if you've got an inward focus, if you're just about making sure you're comfortable and convenient and things you enjoy, you're just finding yourself in those places, ultimately you're going to find an end to who you are. You're going to cease to exist because the work of Christ is about seeing others come into an experience and an encounter of Jesus, of his work of transformation, of change, of moving from death into life, of seeing and experiencing healing and wholeness. And if we are caught and consumed with ourselves, with my wants, my desires, my needs, instead of having a desire and a commitment to serve and love others, we are eventually going to find an end. But the mission and the Spirit of Christ is a spirit of missions. It's a spirit of responding to going in the gospel, to making disciples in all nations, to declaring and bearing witness to the work of Christ in our lives, the way we've encountered his grace and his mercy, the way we've encountered his love and his hope, the way we've encountered his peace and his joy. And that we would bear witness to those things in the world and in the places that he's planted us. It's why on a weekly basis we send one another out. Go and be the church in the places that you live, learn, work, and play. How we respond to that, how we engage in that, how we see Jesus work through us to see that worked out in our world. We read the passage from Acts chapter 1. And we get listed these different places. And oftentimes we have this view that the call of the gospel is that we've got to go to the farthest reaches of the world. But one of the things about the message in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, is that it's speaking actually to not just physical distance, but cultural difference. Like there's a cultural difference, and that's what was being spoken to the church, is saying there's these people of different cultures, of different ethnicities that I want you to go to and bring the message of Christ into those places to share the good news of Jesus. One of the things about our time, the place that we find ourselves, is that we see the world coming to us. The different cultures coming and finding home here in Canada. And we don't have to go very far to cross some of those cultural differences, to cross some of those cultural barriers. I was just having a conversation after the first service with one of the couples that attends, and they were just talking about the new job that she has and serving in the LINK program, and how the new cultures, all the cultures of the world are coming and being part of this school as international students, and the opportunity she has to share Jesus with people that are coming from different places and different cultures and different experiences. It was a stark reality for us. We moved from a little community in the southeast corner of BC, and it was predominantly white, pretty much all whites all around us. And then we moved to southeast Edmonton, and it was a cultural experience. We sent our kids to school, and you want to hear the stories. Hey, how's school? In the first week when we moved to Edmonton, and asking about their fellow classmates, and our kids are like, I have a hard time pronouncing their names. And it was a learning process for us. My son's best friend became Amir, who was a Muslim from Bosnia. And so a whole different experience as you begin to celebrate birthday parties and you can't order pepperoni pizzas. How do we cross some of those cultural barriers? Are we willing to engage people that are different than us? Because so often our life is built around the things that are comfortable and convenient and like us. And yet the call of the gospel, the call of Jesus to follow after him is actually to be willing to cross some of those cultural differences, and we bear witness to the work of Christ in our lives. That we point people to the one who brings redemption and transformation, the one who brings hope and healing. We have opportunity to join in the work that Christ is doing in us and through us. Sometimes that is as simple as responding to follow Jesus on a short-term trip. Sometimes it's being willing to say, Jesus, wherever you're going to lead me, I'm going to follow. And that might be something that is a long-term process. Maybe it's just as simple as saying, I would be willing to step across that cultural difference that I find in my workplace, that I find in my school, that I find amongst our friend group or in our neighborhood, and to invest in and lean in and learn and love those around me. I think about the hockey team at Briarcrest in our time there, and you can talk about crossing cultural boundaries. I mean, the hockey culture is its unique culture. It's got its own lingo, right? We're going to take a half clapper, top cheese, looking for Geno's and apples, and there was a way for us to step across some cultural barriers with the message of Jesus and say, this is the one who's brought change and transformation, and the fruit that grows out of that. St. Alberta Alliance Church, we have opportunity to partner with specific missions partners. There's a number of organizations, a number of people, and we've got a couple that we've partnered with over the years, supporting them financially, supporting them by going down and just being with them, helping them. The one we're going to hear about, the first one we're going to hear about is, her name is Cheryl Hupel de Jamedo. She is serving in Rosarito, Mexico. She works with a church and Celebrate Recovery Ministry that you're going to hear a little bit about. But we've had opportunity to walk with her over a number of years as she served and loved people in Mexico, bringing hope and healing. And maybe the response for us is that we say, Jesus, I'm willing to go. That's what started it all for Cheryl. So I want to encourage you to have a look at the screen, and we'll watch this video from Cheryl and a little bit of update of what God's doing in and through her. Well, Cheryl, thanks so much for joining me, and glad we could actually be in person to share this conversation. Why don't you give everybody a bit of a picture of who you are, where you're at, and what you're doing to give people context.
Okay, my name is Cheryl, and I am a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. So I have had the opportunity to be a part of St. Alberta Alliance Church for many, many years. I think 30 years.
Wow.
Well, but the last almost 18, I've been in Mexico as a missionary, and I am married to a Mexican national named Francisco. And together we serve in missions doing recovery in people's lives.
So tell us a little bit about that. What shape does that take on, and what does that look like for you when you talk about working in recovery ministry?
So my husband, Francisco, is the pastor of the Mexico Recovery Ministry, and we use Celebrate Recovery materials to bring people into a closer walk with Jesus Christ, as well as helping them to find freedom from their dysfunctional behaviors.
Yeah, awesome. So what first captured your attention and your heart for Mexico, right? This is your area. You grew up, you're around, like, the capital region was home. Yeah. And now you find yourself in Mexico starting 18 years ago. What began to capture your heart, your attention there?
The people. The people are incredibly beautiful, kind, gentle. I mean, of course, you know, there's people in every country and in every city that are broken and they need Jesus, but the people deeply are incredibly beautiful people. Yeah, I love working with them.
So what was the opportunity that started it for you, that allowed you to see and interact with people? Like, did you go on a trip down to Mexico, or how'd that start?
A short-term missions trip. Yeah, that's where it all started. A 1-week short-term missions trip this captured the heart of myself and at that time, my deceased husband. I mean, we were together for 13 years serving together.
Yeah. And so it was one trip that began to just open your eyes to God's heart for the people, and then a willingness on your part to go.
Oh, the calling was great.
Yeah?
Yeah. I had been called years earlier. I went through discipleship training school with Youth with a Mission, and then was a single mom at the time, came back and met my husband at that time, Rod. And I said, you got to promise me if we get married, we got to go someday. So 10 years later, we went on our first trip, and God immediately got a hold of his heart.
Wow.
So we served together for 13 years before he went to be with Jesus.
Yeah. You have also worked with another ministry or another focus of ministry, working with women in prisons in Mexico as well. So can you speak to that a little bit, about some of the stuff you've done there and some of the opportunities that have been there in the past, and hopefully again as we move past COVID and all those things in the future?
So that's my huge passion, is women in the prison. And, you know, we can go in there thinking, well, maybe I'm a little nervous about them or something, but guess what? They're just like us. These are women that have come through extreme brokenness in their lives. And we have the opportunity for the last 13 years, it'll be in June, bringing the Celebrate Recovery program in there, into the prison. And they respond extremely well.
So Cheryl, what are areas that as a church we can be praying for you? Praying for you in this season. What are some key highlights or some key areas like, man, we would really value seeing God move in these places, in these ways?
I think the greatest would be for wisdom for Francisco and I as we move forward in this new direction that God has taken us, and wisdom and beautiful hearts for the people that are so broken. COVID has done a number on a lot of people. People are broken and people are in need of healing, and I think that's why our numbers are so great now.
Yeah.
So, you know, we need more leaders all the time. And the other part is, you know, we need to be there for people. So we need more mentors, more people that will come alongside us and mentor people that are in need at this time. So I would say those are our greatest needs.
Yeah. It is so significant for yourself, the ministry you've had. You think about the story of 18 years of life and ministry in Mexico is not insignificant, and the impact is large. And things, you know, when you think of the small start, where it's like, this was a starting point, and God began to grow, that is always inspiring and, important as we navigate these days where we're learning to grow as people who follow Jesus, and we listen, trust, and obey, and see that work out.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, Cheryl, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for the invitation. I just love how God just worked this out.
Yeah, absolutely.
At this particular time in life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is exciting to hear how God is at work, and like many of us, navigating new realities in COVID, and what COVID has done for Cheryl, as she was sharing as we had more time in a conversation, the way he's opened doors through technology. So their reach and their function had particularly been around Rosarito, Mexico, and through COVID, needing to do meetings over Zoom, they are just seeing God reach across Mexico with the Celebrate Recovery program, seeing people experience healing and wholeness. And it all started with a willingness to say yes. Right? It isn't this big, huge, daunting task, but it starts with a willingness to say, yes, Jesus, I will follow. And it might be a short-term trip. I know Josh Ginn, leading our senior high ministry, is planning a summer short-term experience this summer down into Calgary to work with Mustard Seed. Opportunity for students to join in and say, Jesus, can I follow? I'll follow you to those places. I know he's also working on a trip for next summer, going and serving with another missions partner, Ray and Cindy Perry, in Mexico City. And it starts with a place to say, yes, I will follow. As St. Albert Alliance Church, we're part of a denomination called the Alliance in Canada. We have part of our DNA, part of our makeup, part of our value is missions and a deeper life focus. We have over 250 international workers as part of our denomination that would carry with them the message of Christ into various places around the world. They would enter into places where they need creative means to get into countries, whether that's through business or education. They carry with them the message of Christ, bringing basic services into their community, supports, care for those around them. One of the ministries that we partner with consistently and have partnered with for over the last decade is a ministry in Cuba, building into and growing national leaders, walking alongside the work that God is doing in and around the country. And it's a significant work. It's actually significant to see that the national leaders have been being raised up and carrying with them the message of the gospel throughout the country, and actually going from Cuba into, they were actually heading into places like Russia. You're going to hear Blake talk about inflation that's increased, and so many people from Cuba are fleeing, but one of the only places they could go is to Russia. And so they were actually seeing church leaders raised up and sent out to go plant churches amongst Cuban immigrants into Russia, and this was obviously before everything went crazy there. But we're going to hear from Blake and hear some of the story of the way God's been at work in and through the church and the church leaders in Cuba that we've been a part of supporting.
Yeah, just as Mike and I have been just sharing on Cuba and being brought up to date on what's happening there. As many of you know, and some of you may not know, the work in Cuba is primarily a house church movement. So it's not a recognized church. The government refuses to recognize the Alliance Church in Cuba. And so there's house churches all across the nation, which would be from 40, 50 people up to 200 people. So it's really, really amazing to see the growth that's happened as a result of the house church movement. But in that as well, there are challenges, especially recently. And with COVID and with the economic challenges that have resulted, and one of those is there's been about 500% inflation just over the last couple of years. So for someone making an average of $25 a month, it's pretty hard to put food on the table. And so one of the areas that we've been helping is trying to supplement that. And so with help from St. Albert, and there's been other churches as well that have helped us in our Family Crisis Fund, we've been able monthly to get them help, to get them food, and also sometimes to provide them with the income to go out and buy what they need to supplement their family needs. So that's been crucial. And one thing we've seen as a fruit of that, or a result of that, many pastors from other denominations have left Cuba, hundreds, and are in a crisis mode. But so far to date, because of this support, we have not lost one pastor. So that's been really, really encouraging. So we just want to really thank you for that. And this is an area, of course, just to be praying for, because the crisis is ongoing. Another area outside of the helping and supplementing their needs is trying to come up with a plan to help them actually become productive in each region to help their own pastors. So through what we call our microeconomics fund, and St. Albert has given to that, and for $12,000, and St. Albert sent 13, we were able to get a tractor. So we're providing tractors across the nation in different regions, so that we can actually help them farm land that is donated by members of different churches for that purpose. And so that is now happening. And so we just want to say thank you for your giving to this, because it really allows them to begin to produce the food they need for their families. So that's been a real exciting thing. Being a non-recognized church movement, one of the areas that's been a struggle for us is none of our pastors are able to train at any recognized seminary in Cuba. And so what's happened is we've, together with the Cuban church, created their own seminary. It's not recognized in Cuba, but it is recognized outside of Cuba. So that's interesting. Later, as they receive their training, and we bring in professors from all over to teach and to equip, and in turn, we see our Cuban graduates trained and equipped to teach. So then they go out and do it in the regions of Cuba. And so it's really been exciting to see how the education model is being effective. And so that's another area that St. Albert has given to for a long time. And we're just so thankful for that. That's ongoing. And so we have many graduates now, and they are now multiplying what they've received across the island. And the other area is the practical training. So there's theological training, but there's also practical training. And so that's a whole other branch where in the central part of Cuba, we have what's called a church planters training school. And so this particular night where you see this picture, there were 8 teams being trained to plant churches. And they're trained in every area, whether it's counseling, whether it's preaching, leading worship, evangelizing, all the different areas. And they're trained together. These teams receive the training, then they practice, and they kind of watch and observe one another and give tips of how they can become better at that. And so it's been really exciting to see the fruit that's come from that. And one of the things about Cuba is, for me, is the sacrifice of the pastors, because they go out and they actually choose to build a shack up in the mountains, reaching the most difficult areas, and sacrifice to do that. And so one of the things that we've just been really encouraged about is the sacrifice of our pastors. When they see so many others that really have said, I can't do this anymore. We have seen the pastors of the Alliance there make a decision to sacrifice and live in the most difficult areas. And so our leadership team is asking for prayer. We're thankful for the giving that's coming, and we're thankful for the prayer that is enabling these pastors to do that and to make that sacrifice. But we need you to continue praying for them, because it's a very, very difficult and challenging time in Cuba right now.
Yeah. Well, Blake, thanks for giving us a bit of a snapshot of the work that's happening in Cuba, the way God's continuing to move, especially in and through a COVID season that's created its own challenges and unique opportunities, and just a snapshot of how our local pastors are continuing to serve and love people in those communities, extending God's good news to those around them. So, yeah,
you are
thanks
welcome.
for the time.
No, it's a real privilege to be here, to be able to share.
It is challenging when you hear the words, the experiences that our local pastors in Cuba are experiencing. We feel the pressure in Canada as we're dealing with inflation of 7-8%, all those kind of things, cost of living going up. When you think of inflation hitting 500% and the impact in those communities, and yet a willingness to lean in, to invest, to be part of what God is doing, to go and live out the practice of carrying with them the good news of the gospel, to go and make disciples, that they would see and experience the work of Christ in their lives. The opportunity we have is a response to say, Jesus, use me. God, would you use me in some way? We are ones who steward. We talk about it in our generosity prayer each week. God, would you use me to be stewards? Would you use me to be attentive to the way that you're at work? How can I use the time, the resources, my talents? How can I use those to see the message of the gospel brought to bear in the places we live, learn, work, and play? How would you use me? Would I be willing to say, yeah, Jesus, I surrender to what you have for me? I'd be willing to go. Use me. So often our life is built around trying to make sure that we're comfortable, trying to miss out on hardships and trials and difficulties. And yet the call of following Jesus is saying, Jesus, would you use me? And we read through the book of Acts and you see the stories played out time and again. The going of the gospel was never easy. It was never simple. It was never convenient. And yet the faithfulness of God's people to respond to his leading, saying, I'll be one who bears witness to the work of Christ in my life. I'll be one who out of an abundance, experiencing God's grace and mercy, will declare his goodness to the world around me. I will be one who will cross some of those cultural boundaries, cross those cultural differences to share a message of a Christ who loved the world. I'll be one who will choose to steward my resources in a way to release those for the sake of the kingdom. We support missions like Cheryl and Cuba We support missions through the Alliance across the world. In our giving envelopes on those, you'll see opportunities that you can give for global missions. On our website, you'll see opportunities to do that if you give through the Stack app. As you give with e-transfers, you can put those markers in the text box as a way to say, Jesus, I want to see the resources you've entrusted to me. Go and support those who are carrying with them the message around the world. Maybe it's the opportunity for you to respond to a chance to go, to walk alongside those who are serving in various places around the world, to support, to encourage, to cheer them on, to see God continue to use them in significant ways as they bear witness to the joy and peace and love and grace of Christ. That they would bear witness to the work of transformation and change in their own lives. That the work of Christ in us fuels us to be people who say, use me, send me, I'm willing to follow. That we would be people that exist to bring good news to our neighbors and beyond as we practice the way of Jesus. That St. Alberta Alliance Church would be known for those things in and around our community and then around the world. I'm going to pray and we'll sing to finish off this morning as we choose to follow after Jesus today. Jesus, I'm grateful for the way that you called us. Jesus, your Spirit equips and empowers us. Jesus, I'm grateful that we get to join the work that you're doing in this world. May we walk as followers of Christ with a posture of surrender. To say, Jesus, use me. Wherever you want me to go, whatever you want me to do, I'm willing. Would we be ones who are willing to count that cost, to say we will follow after you? Jesus, I'm grateful that you would invite us to join you in the work that you're doing, to partner with you in those places that we live, learn, work, and play, but in those places around the world, to see the good news of the gospel proclaimed. So Jesus, may we have a heart posture that says, here I am, send me.